mean, one of my biggest concerns, to be honest, is about foreign policy. I worry about violating, long-standing sort of treaties and ideas like the Geneva Conventions, statutes on torture. I worry about losing the moral high ground, I suppose, in that regard, that I think that the United States sort of, we should expect of ourselves. So that's big for me. Domestically, I worry about people who are coming here for a better life having their rights violated. I worry about not being, I worry about issues with healthcare in terms of, just today being the day that this was filmed, the the American Health Care Act passed the House, and I worry about people with pre-existing conditions because I know that the new statutes are not as strong as perhaps some have claimed them to be. So that is a concern. I worry about a woman's right to choose. I worry about, there's that new religious liberties executive order that's coming up. I worry about churches getting involved in politics strictly because I don't feel they should be tax exempt if they do, because that's a bit of a conflict of interest. I worry about these things because they form the foundation for American life. And not just recently. The separation of church and state is an idea that goes back to our founding. And I feel that we lose something when we take those away, and that's a concern for me.
Can you repeat the question?
I count myself as a progressive and a liberal. I have problems with the Trump approach because I fear the loss of our civil liberties, affordable health care, and our very humanity. What do you as a Trump supporter fear?
What do I fear? Putting aside that's totally a loaded question. What I fear as a Trump supporter is that he is not going to live up to the promise of his campaign. What I mean by that is this. You have, in America, you have an increasing divide between the coastal elites and the flyover country. The people that you and I grew up with in Rochester, New York, even though they voted for Clinton overwhelmingly, I would count them in this part. I mean, you have,
I agree.
The American people are increasingly isolated from Washington, D.C., from L.A., from New York City.
From each other.
From each other, exactly. And from the culture of, there's a definite culture gap between middle America and the elites. And I think the election of Trump is not only a wholesale rejection of our current political system, it's a wholesale rejection of gridlock and partisan strife. This is somebody that the American people wanted because he is an outsider, because he is not inherently even a Republican or a Democrat. He is someone in a blunt instrument that's going to tear up the system and start fresh. And I worry in that sense that he's going to deviate too strongly from conservative principles. I believe in free markets. I believe in free people. I'm generally supportive of free trade, and I'm supportive of immigration. I think immigrants bring a lot of value to our country. But I think we do have a problem with people that, you have automation, right? That's happening all across the country. I think that is going to be the greatest social crisis of our generation, is when you have self-driving cars come out, 8 million Americans out of work. Do you know what the number one employer of high school educated men is? Truck driving. Once all those people get laid off, what's going to happen? And yet we pair this policy with bringing in low-skilled workers from other countries that are, in effect, taking jobs that Americans should be having, and that are taking jobs that Americans need and will need going forward. And I think people like that don't have a college degree are getting phased out in this new world. So I hope that Trump keeps them in mind. And a lot of the concerns that you raised would have been concerns of yours had there been any other Republican in the White House. So I don't think that, aside from foreign policy, I mean, you can argue that Trump is definitely different when it comes to foreign policy.
Yeah.
And is, I don't want to say, an unsteady hand, but a less steady hand than,
Yeah.
say, if Marco Rubio was in office. You would probably feel more comfortable if Marco Rubio or somebody like him were in office than Trump. I understand that
Yeah.
100%. And I would too, because quite frankly, my foreign policy aligns more with Rubio than Trump. But I will say this, Trump is the most socially liberal Republican that has ever been in the White House. I mean, the guy is from Manhattan. So the idea that we're going to go away and strip humanity from all these people, I think is quite ludicrous. You look at the Religious Liberty Executive Order, completely toothless. I mean, it totally excludes LGBT citizens as far as discriminatory against them. So
I'm not necessarily sure that I agree with that, though. I mean, if you look at sort of what the ICE has already done, there's already concerns with people having their rights violated. When you look at
what do you mean by that?
the ICE,
No, I know what the ICE
Okay,
is. What do you
okay.
mean by having their rights violated?
I mean, people are getting forced out of their homes. That's the point of
Who
of
are they,
ICE.
though?
I mean, they are undocumented. I will admit that.
They shouldn't be here in the first place.
Well, we make the process way too hard to gain citizenship.
I'm not arguing that. But you're breaking the law if you're here illegally.
Yeah, but what if the law isn't fair to you? What do you do about that?
They don't have a right to be here. The only reason that
I
they're here is
suppose-
because of our generosity.
A legal right, yeah, but then where's that generosity? I mean, there's a reason that President Reagan gave amnesty to millions of illegal immigrants. It's because they want to come here for a better life. And when you deny that to them, I see that as inherently un-American. And I agree with you that there are problems of automation.
I think American values is rule of law. And I think once we lose respect for the rule of law, we've lost a central American value.
What I will then get asked though, what about Reagan?
Reagan, you're talking about Simpson Mazzoli, right?
I mean,
So
it
Reagan,
happened in the Reagan administration.
well, obviously, I know
Yeah.
that, but that was supposed to be a kickstarter for border security, which never got accomplished. So Reagan didn't want to give amnesty to 3 to 5 million illegals like he did without border security, but it happened. So that's what happens when you have an outsider like Reagan was. Reagan had more governmental experience than Trump.
Yeah, I mean, he'd been a governor.
Obviously.
Yeah.
But, and that's my other fear with Trump, is that he is so outside the political establishment.
There's no experience.
I am worried about his ability to get done what he wants to get done. Because his agenda, I mean, you saw it in a number of things. For example, the healthcare bill, right?
Right.
What he wants to do is more in line with what the American people want than the House Republican leadership. I mean, you have this agenda which benefits everybody in this town. I mean, free trade all the time. You know what I mean? Doesn't matter how many people we bring in. It always benefits us. I mean, take a look outside. I mean, go walk around. It's like Lake Wobegon here. Everyone walks around with a smile on their face. There's a construction crane in every corner. So for people that live in this town, it's a really good thing, right? All the policies that are happening. But
Yeah.
for the people that don't, for the people that have to actually bear the cost of these policies, it's not a good thing. And that's why Trump won. So his danger is being manipulated by Congress and letting them make him lose sight of his priorities. For example, this wall funding, right? In order to avoid a government shutdown, he decided to punt that till September. Who knows if that's ever going to get done?
I doubt it. I mean, I do doubt it. I mean, first of all, I can't see him getting the political capital for it. There's huge issues with actually getting the land. I mean,
But here's the thing, that's not even my point. I'm saying you have a Congress, and especially the Democrats,
they're going to take it. Well,
who are in
I think Paul Ryan.
lockstep opposition.
I think Paul Ryan
to what
really
Trump wants
knows
to do.
how to take advantage of his sort of inexperience with politics. I think he's been quite good
Absolutely.
at that so far.
And I think that, another greatest fear of mine, because apparently I'm answering this question in steps, is
Fine.
that Republicans, there's no use in voting for them. Because, I mean, look at this CRA that was just passed, right? To fund the $1.1 trillion omnibus bill to fund the government until September. We're not doing any of the things we said we were going to do. Namely, we're not defunding Planned Parenthood, and there's no funding for the wall. So a lot of your fears can and should be assuaged by the fact that Republicans apparently have no idea what they're doing.
I mean, I sort of thought this is going, well, first of all, executive orders do have power in the sense that they do administer agencies and the enforcement of laws, right? So, sorry, not the enforcement of laws, but people who have those powers, right? With Congress, I would say, I mean, I knew that they were going to do a lot of this. They've been promising things for 7 years, things that were completely
that's
unfeasible
natural.
to promise those.
And
The
that's
thing-
natural.
But people voted them in 2010 with a huge Tea Party wave. 2012 was a slight respite from that because President Obama was reelected, and then 2014 and 2016. But I think that, first of all, I think that repealing Obamacare is going to have huge, huge consequences for them. Second of all, because I think that people are going to find that they liked it now that they actually had it. Second, I think that what we saw with what happened after the election is a really good indicator of the problems that they had. Them not being able to put out a replacement plan for the Affordable Care Act for, what was it, like 2 months? Because
I agree
they
with
had
you.
no idea what they were doing.
But
They had
here's the thing.
6 years to plan that.
I
mean,
agree with that. But
I mean,
here's the
I
thing. It
think
took you one and a half years to do
no,
Obamacare.
I agree with that, but it was mostly because they were trying to figure out what policies to pursue in the sense of, do we go too far? Do we not go far enough?
I get
You know,
that.
they'd work with a lot of people to actually make the policies happen. They had been railing against that law for 6 years and didn't have a plan to replace it. 6 years. And first of all,
You don't have to keep hammering
I
this,
just-
because
I-
I agree with
I
you
just think
100%.
it's- I just think it's
I think it was a
ridiculous, but-
massive failure of the Republican Party leadership.
Yeah.
And a lot of this early stumbling could have been avoided had we agreed on a plan
I mean, I agree.
previously.
I agree with that.
But, by the way,
I also don't think the Democratic leaders have done anything to respond to that well. I mean, I first of all do not think that it was a good idea, and I still don't think it's a good idea for the Democratic leaders to just sit back and wait for Trump to mess up. Yes, that has happened, and yes, that's happened quite a fair bit, especially sort of those 24 hours of astonishment that happened a couple days ago of him just having these giant gaps in the media.
but I mean,
But I feel as though they haven't really had good judgment. I mean, I have felt for a very long time that there needs to be shakeup in leadership. I feel like not a lot of young voices in the House are getting the opportunity to speak as they should. I feel as though there are much better senators to take part in, real leadership positions. I think Chuck Schumer would have been a fine minority leader if Hillary had won the Electoral College vote. Obviously, she did win the majority of popular votes. I feel as though he would have been a fine majority leader if they'd run back the Senate. But being in the position that they are in, I feel like he represents everything that people who voted for Trump dislike about the current state of the Democratic Party. And that's what I felt was so inappropriate, I would say, about him becoming the minority leader.
Yeah.
Not that I feel as though he has done a bad job, but again, it's that imagery, it's that message that you're sending people.
But I mean, getting back to the original totally biased question, I think the rhetoric is overblown on both sides, right? I don't think that the Trump administration is going to lead to this massive, taking away of people's rights and all this stuff. Because,
But what about the
quite
executive
frankly,
orders on the refugee crisis?
which got struck down by
They got struck down
judges.
because they were unconstitutional, but
Not only that,
as
they got
they were
struck down
enforced,
because they were written. Number one, they were based on a list of 7 countries from the Obama administration. Number one, which all outside of Iran don't have central functioning governments. So putting that part aside, which
yes,
is
but
totally true.
that was also temporary in terms of
So
it
was this?
being-
So was this ban?
They were
It was
indefinite.
90 days.
They were-
It was 90 days. You can look it up. You're wrong. It's 90 days. But anyway, here's the
The
thing.
second one was 90 days. Wasn't the first one indefinite?
No, they were both 90 days. The first one went farther than the second one, but they were both 90-day bans because they wanted to figure out a more coherent vetting process from countries that don't have obviously, functioning central governments.
But
And
we
and
have
both
a
of them got
coherent vetting
struck.
process of the thing.
Yeah,
And
but
plus,
they-
the enforcement ended up being not only on religious grounds, which was one of the biggest problems, because it gave
Well,
preference
here's
to
the problem with
certain
the Trump
Christians.
administration. You have novices writing these executive orders, and you have people that are totally new to the political system that cannot turn his policies into something coherent.
But I think
So-
the concern
and
about
that's why
his
I think a lot
policies
of
is
these.
the fact that they are inherently authoritarian to the point where they are going against constitutional precedent.
You would say that about any Republican.
No, I would not.
Yes, you would.
No, I
I mean,
would
that's
not.
totally silly.
I would not
And
say that about Mitt Romney. I would not say that about John McCain. I would not say that about Marco Rubio.
You just don't like Trump as a person, and that's why
I
you're
find him
saying that.
extremely authoritarian, and that worries me. That distinctly worries me.
Here's the thing, you know, the rhetoric is so overblown with we're losing our humanity. Like, that is so ridiculous. And each side says that as a new president
Why?
comes into power. Why isn't it ridiculous? Why don't you prove to me why we're losing our humanity?
Because the amount of hate crimes since he was elected have gone up drastically, especially for people in my community, which is the Jewish community and also the Muslim community, because he is encouraging the normalization of behavior and language that is simply not okay. Because he is creating an environment for this to thrive. That's the biggest problem I have with it. When Richard Spencer, who is basically an open neo-Nazi, is a mainstream figure, you have a problem.
What? You know what? You have no basis to talk about my movement. If you elevate
alt-right.
Richard Spencer, no, Richard Spencer is a totally marginal figure that the media blows up to make him to discredit the conservative movement, much
He's
like
not a
David
conservative.
Duke.
He's an alt-righter. There's a difference.
Yeah,
And that movement
and
is
the alt-right
growing.
is nothing.
Milo
The alt-right
Yiannopoulos,
is nothing.
Richard Spencer,
They're nothing. They're
not
mean words
nothing.
online.
Yes,
That's all
but
they are.
they have bases of support that are growing. That concerns me. I do not think it's coincidental that hate crimes have increased just here
Where
on
did you
this
get those
campus. There are numbers I saw from New York Times, from Washington Post. I read a lot about this. I hear a lot about this.
But
There are the
aren't you
American Civil
concerned-
Liberties Union, the Seven Party Law Center were two places. Both are concerned about the increase of hate crimes.
Aren't you concerned about the suppression of free speech too?
But there is a thin line that has to be managed between free speech and actual, like, I do not consider it free speech when you are drawing swastikas on the windows of Jewish businesses, which happened the day after the election. I don't consider that just free speech. You are instilling fear in somebody.
Oh, I agree with that.
That is
100%.
dangerous.
But I think connecting that with Trump is equally dangerous.
I do not, because Trump has encouraged that.
And I think, quite frankly, it's a shame that this has happened. But the ratcheting up of rhetoric on both sides has been a problem. And
I mean,
there's no way to fix that unless we can come together.
I mean, I do agree with that. These are just my concerns as I'm presenting them, because for the first time, I think, ever, I am a little scared about being a Jewish American. That is not something I could have said before now. I mean, that worries me. I've always thought of, Jews have a long history in this country, and I find that really scary. And it's just not something that I've really felt before. And I think that's part of what's so important, right, is the fact that I think people should be able to feel safe here. I really believe that.
Well, of
And-
course, I think any American would.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And if full communities aren't feeling safe because there have been increases in hate crimes, then we need to be able to talk about that. And I agree with you on that. I think that's really important. My concern, though, is that, when you have someone like Steve Bannon in such a position of power, it does make people extremely nervous. I mean, obviously Bannon's been pushed out now, but I think that's largely been due to that pressure, right? And that worries me. Simply put.
I mean, I'm sorry to hear that, but we have to keep moving forward, and we have to keep trying to unify people. Because if we don't, if we lose that ability to sit down and talk to one another, and we pretty much have. I mean, look at this campus this week.
Yeah.
I mean, for those of you who don't know, Monday morning the campus was greeted with nooses with bananas in them hanging around with the words "Free AK," which is a name of a sorority on campus that our first black female president of the student body belongs to. And, you know, there was a total outcry from people of color on this campus. And, you know, you have to admit, though, some of the stuff that they wanted to do was pretty far beyond the pale. Like,
I'll admit, I've been totally inundated with finals, so I haven't
Like-
even been on campus
like
until today.
one of the things they wanted to do was what they call black-centered housing, which is housing for African American students only. At a certain point, we're regressing,
I
right?
don't-
That is the definition of segregation.
I mean, I'm never going to agree with self-imposed segregation
Mm-hmm.
because I feel as though it lowers the ability for people to interact
Mm-hmm.
and sort of, I mean, either the person that did this didn't understand the potency of what they were doing, which to me is disturbing, or an even more disturbing idea is that they did understand, right? So either way, it's sort of a bad, really bad situation.
Yeah.
But for me, I would say that I don't think self-imposed segregation is necessarily the answer. I mean, obviously, I'm not a person of color, so I can't. I do not and will never understand how that feels. But and there were similar, obviously not as drastic events that involved anti-Semitic imagery right after the election on this campus.
Oh, of course, yeah.
that weren't covered nearly as
Yeah.
drastically because again they weren't nearly as drastic, and I understand that. But the
plus,
thought that
and here's the problem: you have this movement using this tragedy to embolden anti-Semitism too. I mean, in their list of demands, they said no more funding towards the apartheid state of Israel. So
I think there are fair arguments to make in terms of the state of Israel and how they treat Palestinians.
calling them the apartheid state of Israel,
in fairness-
is very anti-Semitic,
I don't agree with that.
and a lot of it comes from the left.
I don't agree actually that that's anti-Semitic. I think there's a difference between anti-Israel and anti-Semitic. I think that anti-Semitism is, for instance, Iran is an anti-Israel state. I would not call them purely anti-Semitic because there are thousands of Jews that live in Iran. It has the second highest Jewish population in the Middle East after, obviously, Israel. The UN labeled what they were doing as apartheid-like, as having
UN is
similarities to
useless.
South Africa. But their investigations typically are very categorically true.
But
And
come on, the
first
UN
it-
sucks. You have to admit that.
No, the UN can be toothless, but I don't think they suck. The UN serves a very important role. I mean, for instance, look at weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. The UN was right. Not to drudge up old mistakes, but the IAEA, which is affiliated with the UN, was correct. They're experts and know what they're doing. The situation in Israel is not good. I am perhaps. I don't support the BDS movement, for instance. I support the BDS movement for settlements. One, because I think the BDS movement is very hard to support in terms of the amount of manufacturing that Israel does for things like tech. So when you buy a computer, buy your phone, you're typically also buying something that was made in
Yeah.
Israel. But I don't agree with a lot of what the Israeli state does, and I don't think that makes me anti-Semitic.
I get it, but we're veering off topic, I think. So, like, bringing it back to
Yeah.
U.S. politics.
I don't
mean,
necessarily think of that as anti-Semitic.
Yeah.
I think of that as anti-Israel. There's a difference. I think that line can be thin.
Yeah.
I think that the term calling somebody Zionist can often be a dog whistle for Jew.
Yeah, I think you should look at the statement because it's a very thin line. But
It is a thin line, but I think it's important to
yeah.
discern between that, is my
But-
point.
You know, do I agree that this election has emboldened some of the uglier forces of our society? Absolutely. And I think that is a direct result of how polarized we've become as a nation, right?
I think it's become a lot easier
And I
to
think-
be more open about that stuff, yeah.
And I think that, look at the reaction from Hillary losing. You know what I mean? I mean, there were riots in the streets. Look at Inauguration Day here. I mean, burning police cars, burning limos, burning trash cans.
I
mean, punching people, assaults.
I don't agree with
You
that.
know what I mean?
I think
it has been a
that's-
totally terrible reaction, not only
Yeah.
from bigots who are not proven usually or always to be from the right, and from people on the left who just can't.
Oh,
see
I'll
those.
agree. There is bigotry on the left.
Oh, no.
Primarily towards.
No, but I'm saying, the reaction from most millennials who voted for Hillary or didn't, right? I mean, there was a poll done. 50% of people protesting didn't even vote. So that shows that they were so confident. I'm not, holding this up as, the most scientific thing in the world. But I'm saying when you have half your protesters that didn't vote,
Did you know where you got the poll from?
that's no, I don't.
Yeah. Okay. I'm just
But
curious.
that's the depth of I think they cited it in the Eagle. That's our student newspaper, by the way, for those who are watching at home. The depth of the problem is that they were so confident that Hillary would win,
Right.
when she didn't. The only way that they could lash out was by being as extreme as they've been. And that's a problem. I mean, our side, my side, ever since I've been involved in politics, we've lost. You know what I mean?
That's not true.
At least on a presidential level.
On the presidential level, yeah, but I
We
mean,
lost
look
both
at
times.
your current situation. Look at the situation you had in 2014. Look at the situation that you have now. Majority of state houses, majority of governors' mansions, president, and both houses of Congress.
No, it's a good time for the Republican
It's the
Party. I
weakest the
understand.
Democrats have been since the 1920s. I mean, and I think that the presidential level has honestly hidden the situation for the Democrats because I think that it's been a very negative situation.
I think
for the Democrats
Obama.
since 2000.
I think the only person that
since
Obama has
2008.
been good at electing is himself.
I
Right?
think that is
You
one of
have
the biggest
lost
mistakes of
over
the Obama.
1,000 seats since his
Right.
presidency began.
I think
Yeah.
it was the biggest mistake of the Democratic Party.
He didn't care
not
about
to,
the DNC.
Not to use his grassroots movement after he won in 2008. I think that was a huge
Mm-hmm.
mistake, and I think that there was a huge backlash. And I do think part of that backlash was racial. I think a lot of people couldn't handle the fact that there was the first black president. I don't think people understood how to sort of normalize that, and I
don't
think
know
that
about
you
that.
saw a lot of that come out in 2010. Because the focus shifted from economics being the priority back to things like social policy, right? And I honestly think that social policy is a large part of what gave the Tea Party success. Obviously, economics is part of it, but I don't think people talk about sort of the social reaction of the Tea Party as a major force as much as they should. I do think that was a big part of it. Just like I think that it was I attribute it honestly similar to sort of the moral majority in the 80s, being similar to so many social changes happening in the 70s.
What I see the Tea Party as, and it's my side,
Right.
so you should defer to me.
I'm not sure about that, but I'll certainly listen to what you have to say.
It is a constitutional grassroots movement, and there is a social component to it definitely, but they're not arguing as Richard Newhouse did for religion in the public square. Right? They're arguing for more of a return to our founding principles, and
I'm not
it's
so sure I
interesting
agree with that,
you
but-
have a Tea Party, which I think I was not a member of the Tea Party, and I think it revealed its intellectual hollowness when it automatically embraced Trump. Right?
Right.
Because
I think it was before that, but I see your point.
You have someone that doesn't really, and is a Trump supporter. I can admit this. He doesn't care about the Constitution,
No, it doesn't.
and he doesn't care about our founding principles. And to the extent that he cares is to the extent that he respects the office that he's in. And now I think that as we move forward, he's getting more presidential. But
I would disagree with that.
he didn't.
But-
Well, of course you would.
Well, he said just a couple days ago he wants to get rid of the First Amendment or sections of it he doesn't like.
No, that's not what he said. But anyway,
He also doesn't like checks and balances.
okay, thinkprogress.org. I read that article too. But
It's not just
here's-
progress.org. I saw this. I think it was Washington Post.
well, that's worse than Think Progress. But anyway,
Oh,
here's the
come
thing.
on.
Here's the thing.
Come on, don't
So-
do that.
So,
It's not
but
worse.
I mean, contrast someone like Ted Cruz, right, who ran his campaign on returning to founding principles,
Not
in
sure I
returning
agree
the
with that either.
Constitution.
I think
don't
I
care
honestly
if you
think of him
agree or
as more of a moral
disagree.
majority figure than I do a Tea Party figure in a lot of aspects, especially on social issues. I think that he does not give a damn about separation of church and state, for instance, which I think of as one of the founding principles of the United States.
Okay, that's fine. I'm not here to
Which
argue
it
about Ted
is,
Cruz.
by the way.
I agree.
Yeah.
I'm not arguing for dissolution of that, and I think you have Trump who is totally in favor of that, right?
Yeah.
Because he's not religious at all.
Well, I think a large swath of the social policy of the Tea Party was honestly co-opted by the religious right, and I think they don't care about a lot of the religious protections of the Constitution. They want Christianity to be the national religion of the United States.
Okay. This is getting in uninteresting territory. So
I'm
I
just
think we
saying-
should go to the next question.
That is my opinion.
I think we need a new topic because
Okay.
we're totally far away from where we started.
Sure.